She was the kind of girl most people didn't notice, quiet, always sitting in the back corner of the classroom, her head often down, her voice barely louder than a whisper. But when she talked about music, her eyes came alive in a way words could never capture. At her small town's music school, where most students came from families who could afford shiny new instruments and private tutors, she stood out for a different reason. Her keyboard was old. Its white keys turned yellow at the edges, and some black ones didn't even press properly. Still, she carried it to school every week like it was her most precious treasure. When she first joined the school, the other students didn't take her seriously. They whispered behind her back, giggling as she tried to plug in her old keyboard, which sometimes made more noise than music. A few even made jokes when her hands shook during practice. They thought she didn't belong there. They were wrong, but they didn't know that yet. Every day after class, she would stay behind, sitting quietly at the piano room long after everyone had left. Sometimes the janitor would peek in and see her still pressing the same few notes over and over, trying to get them right. It wasn't about being the best for her. It was about feeling something real when she played. She believed that music could speak what she couldn't say out loud. Her teacher, an older man who had taught piano for decades, noticed her one afternoon. He stood silently at the door, watching her play. Her fingers moved slowly, unsure, but there was something in the way she touched the keys, something soft, fragile, but full of emotion. When she finished, she looked up, startled to see him there. "You stay late every day," he said kindly. "What drives you?" She hesitated before answering. "I just want to make the music sound true," she said quietly. That was the first time someone had really listened to her words. From that day, the teacher began paying more attention to her. During class, when others rushed to show off how fast they could play, she took her time. She wasn't the loudest or the most confident, but she had something rare: patience. The teacher gave her small challenges each week, and though she often stumbled, she always came back the next day ready to try again. But the laughter never fully stopped. During group sessions, when the students had to play in turns, some of them rolled their eyes when it was her turn. One boy whispered loud enough for everyone to hear, "She'll never get it right." The others chuckled. She heard it, but she didn't respond. Instead, she just smiled faintly and placed her fingers on the keys. It wasn't perfect. Some notes came out too soft, others too harsh. Yet the melody she created had a kind of emotion that none of the others could copy. For a few moments, even the teacher forgot about the mistakes and just listened. But as soon as she stopped, the silence broke into scattered laughter again. She looked down, pretending it didn't hurt. But that night when she went home, she couldn't stop thinking about it. Her home wasn't large or fancy. A small apartment with cracked walls, a flickering bulb, and a second-hand piano that someone had thrown away years ago. She had fixed it herself with tape and glue, turning broken pieces into something that could still play. That piano was her world. Every night after finishing her schoolwork, she sat at that piano and practiced. Sometimes her fingers ached, but she didn't stop. The sound of keys filled the small room, blending with the hum of the ceiling fan. When her family slept, she would lower the volume, pressing each note carefully so no one would wake. There was no audience, no clapping, no spotlight. Just her, the piano, and the sound that made her heart feel less heavy. One evening, while she practiced a song she found online, she noticed her reflection in the dark window. Her eyes looked tired but determined. She whispered to herself, "Someday they'll understand." Weeks turned into months. Slowly, her playing improved. The uneven notes began to smooth out, and the music started to sound beautiful even to her own ears. Her teacher noticed the change too. One day after class, he called her over. "The school concert is next month," he said. "Every student will perform one piece. Would you like to join?" Her heart skipped a beat. "Me?" she asked, almost in disbelief. He nodded with a warm smile. "Yes, you've earned it. You may not see it yet, but your music has something special." The moment she walked out of his office, she could hardly breathe. The school concert was the biggest event of the year. Parents, students, and even local musicians attended it. It was the kind of stage she had only dreamed of standing on. But when the news spread, not everyone was happy. A few students laughed when they heard she'd be performing. "She'll freeze up," one girl said. "It'll be embarrassing for all of us." Another added, "Maybe she'll bring her broken keyboard again." The laughter echoed through the hallways. She heard every word. It hurt, but she refused to let it stop her. That night, she practiced harder than ever before. She picked a song that spoke to her heart, a slow, emotional piece that wasn't about showing off but about telling a story. She didn't want to impress people. She wanted to make them feel something. Day after day, she played the same song. Her fingers began to memorize every note, every pause, every rise and fall of the melody. Sometimes she got frustrated and wanted to cry, but each time she remembered her teacher's words. Your music has something special. One day, while she was practicing at school, the same group of students passed by the room. They stopped at the door listening. At first they smiled, ready to make another joke, but then they paused. The notes drifting from the room were softer than they expected, sad yet full of warmth. The girl playing wasn't struggling this time. She was lost in the music. For a few moments they just stood there, unsure how to react. Then one of them whispered, "Is that really her?" But before anyone could answer, she noticed them watching. She quickly stopped playing, embarrassed. The laughter returned as they walked away, but it was weaker this time, almost uncertain. As the concert day got closer, she grew more nervous. Her teacher encouraged her every step of the way, helping her practice during lunch breaks. "Don't think about the people," he told her. "Think about the music. Let it speak for you." The night before the concert, she barely slept. She kept going over the song in her mind, her fingers twitching even as she lay in bed. She imagined the crowd laughing, whispering, but then she imagined silence, the kind that happens when people truly listen. That was the moment she wanted. The next morning, she dressed in her simple white dress, the only one she had that looked even a little formal. Her hands shook as she carried her sheet music to school. The hall was already filled with chatter, the air buzzing with excitement. Students tuned their instruments, some posing for pictures, others joking around to calm their nerves. She sat alone near the side of the stage, her old keyboard case beside her. She could hear the muffled laughter of the same students who had doubted her. It stung, but she took a deep breath and closed her eyes. In her mind, she wasn't in the crowded hall anymore. She was back in her small room under the dim light, playing for no one but herself. When her teacher walked by, he smiled and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Remember," he said softly, "you're not here to prove them wrong. You're here to play from the heart." She nodded, trying to believe that. As her name was called for the final rehearsal before the big night, she stepped onto the stage. The bright lights hit her eyes, and for a moment she froze. The piano looked enormous. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears. She placed her hands on the keys and waited for her teacher's signal. And then she began to play. The notes were shaky at first, uncertain, but they began to flow smoother as she found her rhythm. The hall grew quieter, the laughter fading into the distance. It wasn't perfect, not yet. But something was beginning to change. What no one realized yet was that this quiet girl, the one they had laughed at for so long, was about to turn their laughter into silence. And soon, that silence would become awe. After that day on stage, everything felt different for her. She didn't play perfectly during rehearsal, but she felt something she hadn't felt before, a small spark of confidence. It was like the music had whispered to her, telling her not to give up. The teacher had nodded with quiet approval, and for her that meant everything. But the days leading up to the concert weren't easy. Each morning when she walked through the school hallway, she could still hear bits of laughter or whispers. Some students teased her softly, pretending to play piano keys in the air when she passed by. Others didn't say anything, but their smirk spoke enough. It still hurt, but this time she didn't let it break her. Every afternoon when classes ended, she stayed behind. The classroom lights would dim as the sun began to set, and she'd sit at the piano with the same song she'd chosen for the concert. The school hallways emptied until only her notes echoed through the walls. The janitor often passed by, smiling kindly at her dedication. There were times her fingers cramped from hours of practice. Sometimes she pressed the same note again and again, trying to make it sound right. She wasn't chasing perfection, she was chasing feeling. She wanted the song to carry her story, to tell the world what words couldn't. When she got home in the evenings, her mother would be waiting with a tired smile. They didn't have much, but her mother always asked how her day went. Sometimes she'd pretend everything was fine. Other times she'd admit that people still laughed at her. Her mother would gently touch her shoulder and say, "Let them laugh. One day they'll listen." Those words became her comfort on the hardest nights. Their apartment was small and quiet. The walls were thin, and the sound of traffic filled the air outside. But once she sat down at her old piano, the world disappeared. The cracked keys and rough sound didn't bother her anymore. Each note she played made her heart lighter. The piano was the only place where she felt free, where she didn't have to prove anything. One evening, a storm rolled in. Rain beat against the window, and thunder rumbled in the distance. The electricity flickered, and then the lights went out completely. Her mother called from the kitchen, telling her to rest for the night. But she couldn't stop thinking about the song, so she lit a small candle and placed it on top of the piano. The flame flickered as she began to play, the soft light reflecting off her face. She played for hours in that dim glow. The rain mixed with the melody, and the room filled with a quiet, almost magical warmth. In that moment, she didn't feel small. She didn't feel like the girl everyone laughed at. She felt powerful, like every note carried her story to the world outside her window. When she finished, her mother was standing quietly by the door, listening. Tears filled her eyes. She didn't say much, only whispered, "That's beautiful." Those words meant more than applause ever could. Days turned into weeks. The concert was getting closer, and she could feel the pressure building. Her teacher worked closely with her, correcting her mistakes and reminding her to breathe between phrases. Sometimes she would get frustrated when her fingers slipped, and she'd shake her head in disappointment. The teacher would smile and say, "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be real." At home, she practiced until her fingertips hurt. The keys had left faint marks on her skin, but she didn't mind. She would take short breaks, stretch her hands, and then start again. Music had become part of her heartbeat. One afternoon, she was practicing at school when she heard footsteps behind her. It was one of the students who used to make fun of her. He stood at the door listening quietly. She stopped playing, unsure if he was there to mock her again. But instead he said softly, "That sounded good." She didn't know what to say. Before she could reply, he walked away. It was a small moment, but it gave her hope. Maybe people were starting to see her differently. Still, fear lingered. The thought of playing in front of so many people made her stomach twist. What if she messed up? What if they laughed again? Late at night, when everyone slept, she lay awake thinking about all the what-ifs. But each time doubt tried to creep in, she reminded herself why she started. She wasn't doing this for them. She was doing it for herself, for the girl who used to play broken notes in a small room and still believed they mattered. On the last week before the concert, the rehearsals became more serious. The auditorium buzzed with energy. Students in shiny clothes carried violins, guitars, and flutes. Some parents sat in the audience, watching proudly as their children practiced. She felt small among them, her simple outfit and quiet manner making her almost invisible. But when she touched the piano keys, all of that disappeared. During one of the rehearsals, her teacher asked her to play the piece from start to finish without stopping. Her heart raced. She nodded, took a deep breath, and began. The first few notes were steady, gentle, almost shy. But as she continued, her playing grew stronger. The music filled the hall, rising and falling like a wave. When she reached the final note, the sound lingered in the air before fading into silence. No one spoke for a few seconds. Then her teacher clapped softly, pride shining in his eyes. "That's it," he said. "That's the feeling I wanted to hear." She smiled, but deep inside she knew she still had one more challenge, to face the real audience. The night before the concert, she didn't sleep much. She sat by her piano, staring at her sheet music. The candle flickered beside her again. Just like on the night of the storm, she closed her eyes and began to play one last time. Her fingers knew the path by heart. She didn't need to look anymore. As she played, she remembered everything, every laugh, every whisper, every night she practiced alone. She remembered her mother's gentle words, her teacher's encouragement, and even the moments she almost gave up. And through it all, the same thought repeated in her heart. Music will speak for me. When morning came, sunlight streamed through the window, painting the room in soft gold. She packed her sheet music carefully and tied her hair neatly. Her hands were trembling, but her heart felt steady. She looked at the piano one last time before leaving, whispering, "Thank you," as if it were a friend who had helped her survive. At school, the auditorium was buzzing with excitement. Families filled the seats. Children in crisp uniforms hurried around, and teachers gave last-minute instructions. She waited backstage, clutching her sheet music tightly. The sound of laughter and chatter filled her ears, but she tried not to listen. Her teacher came up to her with a calm smile. "Remember what I told you," he said. "Don't play for them. Play for the music." She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. As she waited for her turn, she peeked from behind the curtain. The audience looked huge, more people than she had ever seen gathered in one place. Her palms were sweaty, and her heart felt like it was beating too loud. She tried to steady her breathing. One by one, the students went up to perform. Some played lively songs that made the audience clap along. Others sang or played fast classical pieces that earned cheers. She listened to them all, feeling both inspired and terrified. Finally, her name was called. For a moment, everything seemed to blur. Her feet felt heavy as she walked onto the stage. The bright lights hit her face, and she could hear the faint laughter of a few students somewhere in the crowd. But she didn't look up. She focused on the piano in front of her. She sat down, placed her hands gently on the keys, and closed her eyes. The hall grew quiet. For a heartbeat, she did nothing, just breathed. Then slowly, she began to play. The first notes drifted softly through the air, uncertain but full of emotion. Her hands moved gracefully, the melody flowing like water. The laughter faded, replaced by silence. The sound of her music filled every corner of the room, delicate yet powerful. In that moment, she wasn't the quiet girl anymore. She wasn't the one who was laughed at or doubted. She was just a soul speaking through sound, honest, pure, and beautiful. And though the concert was far from over, everyone who listened knew something had changed. The girl they once ignored was finally being heard. When she sat at the piano that evening, the whole world seemed to disappear around her. The lights above were bright, almost blinding, and the quiet murmurs of the audience faded into a soft blur. She could feel her heartbeat echoing in her chest, faster than the rhythm of any song she had ever played. For a brief moment, her hands trembled. She could almost hear the laughter from months ago, those voices that told her she didn't belong here. But then she remembered every night she had practiced, every tear she had wiped quietly when no one was watching, and every word her teacher had said, "Play from the heart." She took a deep breath, placed her fingers on the keys, and began. The first notes were gentle, uncertain, like a shy voice finding its courage. They floated through the hall, soft as a whisper. A few people leaned forward, surprised by how delicate it sounded. Then, as the melody built, her hands grew steadier. The uncertainty faded. The room, once filled with noise, began to still. Her eyes stayed closed as she played. She didn't need to look at the keys anymore. Every note was part of her, something she had lived through, something she had felt. The melody rose and fell like the beating of her own heart. She could feel the story inside the song, the struggle, the hope, the small victories that no one else had seen. With each chord, she let go of a little more fear. Somewhere in the crowd, a few students who had once laughed sat quietly, their eyes fixed on her. They didn't whisper this time. They didn't smirk. They just watched, listening to the music they never thought she could create. The teacher stood near the edge of the stage, his hands clasped together, a proud smile on his face. He knew how much courage it took for her to be here, how much pain hid behind her calm expression. He had seen her stay late after class, struggling through each mistake, never once giving up. As she played, memories flashed in her mind like faint images. The broken piano keys at home, the rain tapping on the window during the storm, the candlelight that guided her when power went out. Each memory carried emotion, and that emotion poured into her fingers, shaping the way she touched each note. The song shifted into its middle section, soft but heavy with feeling. The melody seemed to speak not in words but in truth. It told a story of being laughed at, of trying again and again, of finding beauty even when everything around felt small. It wasn't a song about skill. It was a song about heart. The audience was silent now. Even the restless children who had been fidgeting minutes before were still. A few parents glanced at one another with quiet amazement. They hadn't expected this. None of them had. Her fingers glided across the keys, faster now, more confident. The rhythm grew stronger, filling the hall with warmth and emotion. It wasn't loud or showy, it was alive. Every sound carried a piece of her spirit, honest and unpolished. Then, near the end of the song, the music slowed. Her hands trembled again, but this time it wasn't fear. It was emotion. She could feel tears forming in her eyes, but she kept going. The final notes were soft, fading like a voice whispering goodbye. When the sound finally stopped, it left behind a deep silence that felt almost sacred. No one clapped right away. The room stayed quiet, as if everyone was afraid to break the moment. She kept her head bowed, unsure of what to do. Did they hate it? Did she mess up? Then someone started to clap. It was her teacher. His applause was steady, gentle at first, then louder. One by one, others joined in. Soon the entire hall filled with applause. The sound grew louder, echoing off the walls. People stood up. The students who once mocked her were now clapping too, some with genuine smiles, others looking a little ashamed. She blinked through her tears, her hands still resting on the keys. For the first time in her life, she wasn't invisible. She wasn't the girl people laughed at. She was the girl who made them listen. She stood slowly, her legs weak, and bowed her head in gratitude. Her teacher walked toward her and whispered, "You did it. You made them feel." As she stepped off the stage, her classmates patted her shoulder, some mumbling words of praise they never thought they'd say. "That was amazing. You really played beautifully. I didn't know you could do that." She smiled shyly, still overwhelmed. In the audience, her mother's eyes were wet with tears. She clapped the loudest, her face glowing with pride. She had always believed in her daughter, even when no one else did. When the performance ended, she hurried backstage and hugged her tightly. "You see?" she whispered softly. They listened. The girl smiled against her mother's shoulder. She didn't need to say anything. The music had already said it all. That night, after the concert ended and everyone had gone home, she returned to the empty stage. The hall was quiet now, the lights dim. She walked to the piano and touched the keys gently. The sound still echoed faintly in her memory, the song that had changed everything. She sat down and played a few soft notes, almost like a whisper of gratitude. There was no crowd, no applause, no laughter, just peace. Her teacher entered the hall quietly and watched her from a distance. When she finished, he said, "Do you know why people stopped laughing tonight?" She looked up confused. "Because when you played," he said, "they didn't just hear the piano. They heard your heart, and no one can mock that." She smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. For the first time, she believed those words. The next day at school, everything felt different. The students who used to laugh now greeted her with respect. Some even asked her for help with their own music. She was still the same quiet girl, still carrying her old keyboard, but something had shifted. She walked with her head a little higher now. During lunch, a few of the students came over to her table. One of them, the same boy who used to mock her the most, sat down across from her. "You were incredible last night," he said quietly. "I didn't think someone like you could play like that." She smiled faintly and said, "It's okay." "I didn't think I could either." He laughed softly, a little embarrassed, and nodded. From that day, the teasing stopped completely. People didn't see her as a joke anymore. They saw her as someone who had done something brave, someone who had turned pain into something beautiful. Over the next few weeks, the story of her performance spread. Teachers talked about her in other classes, saying how proud they were. The local community center even invited her to perform at a small event. She was nervous, of course, but she agreed. This time, she wasn't afraid of the stage. At the event, when she began to play, she noticed something different. The music sounded freer, lighter. There was no fear left in it. She played the same song she had performed at the concert, but it felt new now, like it had grown along with her. When she finished, people came up to her to say how her music made them feel calm and inspired. One woman even said, "I could feel your soul in every note." That night, as she walked home, the air was cool and still. She looked up at the stars and smiled. The same girl who once hid behind her music had now found her voice through it. When she reached home, her mother was waiting by the window. "You're late," she said gently. "Did they like it?" "They did," the girl said with a soft smile. "But that's not the best part." "What's the best part?" "I liked it too." Her mother laughed quietly and hugged her. "That's what matters most." Later that night, she sat again at her old piano. The candle flickered as she played softly, not for an audience this time, just for herself. The notes danced through the air, warm and full of life. The laughter that had once haunted her no longer mattered. She had turned it into something greater, into awe, into silence, into respect. But more than that, she had learned something deeper. When you play from your heart, You don't need anyone's approval. Because real music, like real strength, doesn't come from being perfect. It comes from being honest. And as she played that night, she realized she wasn't just playing a song anymore. She was playing her story, one that began with laughter and ended with something far more powerful. The days after the concert felt almost like a dream. Everywhere she went, people recognized her. The students who once ignored her now stopped to talk. Teachers smiled at her in the hallways, saying how proud they were. Even the principal mentioned her during morning assembly, saying, "We are proud to have such talent among us." She couldn't help but blush every time people clapped for her name. It was strange. For so long she had been invisible, the quiet girl with the broken keyboard, the one who stayed behind after class when everyone else went home. Now people looked at her differently, but deep inside she didn't feel any different. She was still the same girl who loved to play alone in her small room, still nervous before every performance, still wondering if her music was good enough. Her teacher often told her, "Fame is nice, but the real gift is when your music reaches hearts." She thought about those words a lot. One afternoon, as she practiced alone in the empty piano room, the janitor walked by and stopped at the door. He had seen her there hundreds of times before, but this time he smiled in a new way. "You know," he said softly, "I used to think you were just a quiet kid wasting time after school. But now when I clean the halls and hear you play, it makes the whole place feel alive." She looked up, a little shy, and said, "Thank you." That moment meant more to her than all the applause. Weeks passed, and her teacher encouraged her to join a city-level music competition. It wasn't just a school event. It would include students from many schools across the district. She hesitated. The memory of the big concert was still fresh, and though she had earned respect, she still feared failing in front of strangers. But the teacher said gently, "You've already learned how to silence laughter. Now it's time to share your sound with the world." So, she agreed. The days leading to the competition were long and exhausting. Her school friends helped her this time, cheering her on instead of teasing. Some even stayed back after school to listen as she practiced. It was different now. They truly wanted to learn from her. Still, every night when she sat alone at her old piano, she felt nervous. She wasn't chasing trophies or medals. She just wanted to play honestly, the way she always did, and with heart. Her mother watched her practice with quiet pride. Sometimes she would sit nearby, mending clothes or peeling vegetables, humming along to the tunes. "You've grown," her mother would say softly. "Not just in music, in courage too." The competition day came faster than expected. The auditorium was much bigger than her school's. Bright lights, cameras, and banners filled the room. The smell of polished wood and stage dust made her stomach twist with nerves. Contestants from different schools were everywhere, some dressed elegantly, others talking loudly about their years of training. She sat quietly in a corner, her hands folded in her lap. A few people looked at her old instrument case and gave her curious glances, wondering who she was. She didn't mind. She was used to being underestimated. When it was her turn to perform, she walked to the stage slowly. Her heart pounded so loudly that she could barely hear anything else. The host announced her name, and she could hear a few faint whispers from the crowd. A few people wondering if she was nervous or if she could even play. She sat down at the grand piano and took a deep breath. For a moment, everything went still. The lights dimmed slightly and she began. Her fingers moved with a quiet confidence. The song she played wasn't fast or flashy. It was soft, emotional, a piece she had written herself, inspired by all she had gone through. It began with gentle notes that painted pictures of her past, the loneliness, the laughter, the long nights of practice. As the music grew, it spoke of change, of rising above, of finding light even in silence. The audience listened quietly, drawn in by something they couldn't quite explain. It wasn't the kind of performance that made people cheer. It was the kind that made them feel. By the time she played the final note, the air in the hall felt heavy with emotion. The judges exchanged glances, clearly moved. When she lifted her hands from the piano, there was a brief silence, then a wave of applause that grew louder and louder. She stood, bowed, and walked off stage, her heart full. She didn't know if she had won or not, but it didn't matter. For her, the real victory was that she had played her truth again, and people had listened. After the competition, one of the judges, a well-known pianist, came to speak with her. "Your music is pure," he said warmly. "It's not perfect, but it's honest. That's rare. Never lose that." She thanked him, her voice trembling slightly. A week later, the results came out. She had won second place, not the top, but enough to make her and her school proud. When she returned home that day, her mother had tears in her eyes. "You did it," she said, hugging her tightly. But even then, she didn't feel proud in a loud way. She just felt grateful. Grateful that her hard work had found meaning, grateful that her story had changed from laughter to applause. As months passed, her story began to spread. The local newspaper published an article about her. From mockery to music, the girl who played beyond fear. People in her town started recognizing her face. The small music school where she learned began getting more students inspired by her journey. One evening, the same group of students who had once teased her came to her home with flowers. They told her how her courage had inspired them to try again at the things they had once given up. She accepted their kind words with a gentle smile, not out of pride but understanding. She knew what it felt like to doubt yourself, and she was glad her story could help others believe again. Her teacher, who had stood by her since the beginning, told her one afternoon, "You've grown into more than just a pianist. You've become a reminder that talent means nothing without heart." She smiled and said quietly, "You taught me that." Life became busier after that. She started teaching younger children who couldn't afford lessons, using her old piano at home. Some of them reminded her of herself, shy, uncertain, afraid to make mistakes. She told them what her teacher once told her, "Don't play for perfection, play for meaning." And when they asked why she always smiled while playing, she said, "Because every note feels like forgiveness, and for every time someone doubted me, and every time I doubted myself." Her music started reaching beyond her small town. A short video of her performance from the competition went viral online, shared by people who were touched by the story behind it. Messages began pouring in from strangers, people saying her music helped them through loneliness, sadness, or fear. Some said her story reminded them not to give up. She read each message with quiet tears. She had never imagined her little songs, once played in the corner of a classroom, would travel so far. But even as her name began to grow, she never changed who she was. She still walked to school with her old keyboard. She still practiced by candlelight on stormy nights. And she still played not for fame, but because she loved the way music could heal, not just others, but herself too. Sometimes when she visited the empty concert hall where everything began, she would sit at the piano and play softly, remembering that first night, the bright lights, the trembling hands, the silence that turned into awe. She often smiled at the thought that laughter, once sharp as knives, had now turned into applause warm as sunlight. Her teacher once told her, "Music chooses its messengers carefully." She didn't understand it then, but she did now. Music had chosen her, a quiet, overlooked girl, to remind others that beauty can rise from broken things, that truth followed her everywhere she went, and though she had started her journey just hoping to be heard, now her music carried something greater. It gave others hope. Her sound had become a bridge, connecting hearts that had once been closed by fear or doubt. One evening, as she watched the sunset through her window, her mother asked, "Do you ever wish things had been easier?" She thought for a moment and said softly, "No. If they were easier, I might not have learned how strong music can be." Her mother smiled. "Then play something for me." So she sat at the piano again and began to play, a soft tune filled with light and gratitude. The same hands that once shook with fear now moved with peace. The same girl who once hid from laughter now filled her home with music that carried love in every note. And as the sound drifted out the window into the quiet evening, anyone who passed by could feel it. A reminder that sometimes the most beautiful melodies come from the people the world once overlooked. Life had changed slowly, almost quietly for her. The girl who had once walked through crowded hallways with her head down was now someone people noticed. But she never sought attention. She simply let the music do the talking. Even after all the applause, the awards, and the recognition, she remained the same humble girl who practiced late at night in the flickering light of a candle. The difference was in her heart. It had grown stronger, more certain, more open. She had discovered that true strength didn't come from proving others wrong, but from staying true to yourself no matter what. Her days were now filled with music in ways she had never imagined. Invitations to perform came from local schools, community centers, and even charity events. She accepted them quietly, sometimes nervous, sometimes excited, but always with the same intention: to share the feeling she carried inside her. One afternoon, she was invited to perform at a small cultural festival in the town. The organizers promised a modest crowd, nothing like the competition hall she had faced months ago. But when she arrived, she found the square packed with people: children, parents, teachers, neighbors, and even strangers who had heard about her story. Her old classmates were there too. The ones who once whispered and laughed now stood at the front watching with awe. Some of them were smiling, some even clapping before she had played a single note. Their eyes said what their voices could not. They had underestimated her, and now they understood the depth of her gift. She carried her old keyboard carefully to the stage. It looked battered compared to the shiny instruments around her, but to her it was perfect. This was the instrument that had guided her through countless nights of practice, the one that had stayed with her when no one else did. As she sat down, she took a deep breath. The square grew quiet. Children perched on their parents' shoulders. Adults leaned forward, curious and attentive. She closed her eyes and began. The first notes were soft, almost fragile, but as she continued, the music grew. It wasn't about speed or technical skill. It was about feeling, about expressing all the small moments that had shaped her, the laughter that once hurt, the nights of tireless practice, the moments of quiet hope in the dark. Every note carried a story, and the audience could feel it. People who had never thought of themselves as listeners of classical music found themselves leaning forward, their hearts captured by the honesty of her playing. Even the wind seemed to pause, carrying her melody gently through the air. Her teacher stood a few rows back, watching with pride. He had seen her grow from a shy girl into a young woman whose music touched others' hearts. He knew this performance was different. It wasn't just about skill anymore. It was about influence, about inspiring others to believe in themselves. As she played, she noticed a few familiar faces in the crowd. The janitor from her school, who had often peeked at her practice, smiling quietly, stood clapping with admiration. Her mother was there too, tears in her eyes, holding her father's hand. They had always supported her, but now they could see the wider impact of her music. By the middle of the song, the crowd was silent, utterly captivated. The children stopped fidgeting, the adults stopped whispering, even the birds seemed to pause. She played not just with her fingers, but with her whole being. Each chord resonated with emotion, and every pause spoke of patience, hope, and courage. When she reached the final note, the sound lingered in the air longer than she expected. It was a soft echo, a gentle reminder that something beautiful had happened. She opened her eyes and saw faces full of wonder, respect, and even tears. For the first time, she realized fully that her music had the power to reach people, to move them deeply and genuinely. The applause came slowly at first, then swelled into a wave that seemed to carry the town itself. People cheered, clapped, and called her name. Even the classmates who had once mocked her now joined in, shouting encouragements that sounded almost like an apology. She stood, bowing low, her heart pounding with emotion. For a moment she felt overwhelmed. She had never imagined this. All those nights alone, all the ridicule, all the struggles, and it had led her here. And in that instant, she felt a sense of peace she had never known before. After her performance, people came up to her. They didn't talk about her mistakes or her shy nature. They spoke of how her music had touched them. One elderly woman said, "I felt like your music told the story of my own life." A young girl shyly told her, "I want to play piano like you one day." Even some parents admitted that they had underestimated her. She listened to every word, smiling softly, feeling warmth in her chest. She realized that her journey was never really about being praised or winning awards. It was about connecting with others, about showing that determination, patience, and honesty could overcome fear and doubt. Her teacher approached her afterward, his eyes glistening. "Do you understand now?" he asked. "Do you see what your music can do?" She nodded, barely able to speak. "I think so," she whispered. "That's why I always said you had something special," he said. "Not because you play perfectly, but because you play with your heart." Over the next months, her story began to travel beyond the town. Videos of her performances were shared online, gaining thousands of views. Messages came from strangers who felt inspired to pursue their own dreams, people who had faced their own challenges and found courage through her music. Despite the growing attention, she remained grounded. She still practiced at home, still sat by her candle at night, and still cherished the quiet moments when she could play for herself. Fame had never been her goal. Music itself had always been her companion, her comfort, and now it had become her voice to the world. One day, the principal of her school invited her to speak at an assembly. She felt nervous but agreed. Standing in front of hundreds of students, she didn't talk about her achievements. She talked about her journey, about the nights she practiced alone, the ridicule she had faced, and the moments when she thought she couldn't go on. She told them, "You don't have to be the best. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be brave enough to try and honest enough to let your heart speak." The students listened, captivated. Some wiped tears, others nodded in understanding. She had turned the lessons of her struggle into something bigger, inspiration for others to believe in themselves. Even those who had once mocked her approached afterward, offering apologies and gratitude. "I'm sorry for laughing at you," one student said quietly. "You really are amazing." She smiled, accepting it with grace. She understood that forgiveness was part of the journey, just as much as courage and persistence. Soon, she was invited to perform at larger events, festivals in nearby cities, charity concerts, and school gatherings. Each time she carried herself with the same quiet determination. She never forgot where she came from. She remembered the old piano, the lonely nights, the laughter that had once felt unbearable. Every performance was a tribute to that journey. Through it all, her family remained her anchor. Her mother often told her, "You've changed the world for yourself and for others," and she realized that was true. She had changed not because of recognition or applause, but because she had learned to believe in herself and never give up. Even years later, people would remember the girl who had once been laughed at, the one who had turned every doubt into music. She had become more than a pianist. She had become a symbol of hope, courage, and the quiet power of persistence. Her journey had begun with small notes in a lonely room, filled with laughter and doubt. And it had ended with music that could touch the hearts of many. Music that turned every laugh into awe, every doubt into belief. As she sat at her piano one evening, now with a small crowd of students around her, she smiled softly. She played a familiar melody, the song that had carried her through so many challenges. The notes floated gently, carrying with them a story of struggle, courage, and triumph. The children listened with wide eyes, inspired not just by the music but by the story behind it. And she knew, in that moment, that everything had come full circle. The laughter that had once haunted her was now a memory. The doubts that had weighed her down were gone. All that remained was music, honest, true, and alive. Because in the end, she had learned the most important lesson of all. It's not about the applause or the awards. It's about the courage to follow your heart, the patience to keep trying, and the honesty to let your soul speak through the music. And when she played, every laugh that had ever hurt her was transformed into awe, not just for her, but for anyone willing to listen and believe. She looked out at the students gathered around her piano, watching intently, and whispered softly, "This is yours too. Never stop believing in yourself." The room filled with smiles, quiet wonder, and the soft hum of possibility. And as her fingers danced across the keys, she knew that her music would continue to touch hearts long after the final note faded, carrying the story of courage, hope, and the quiet girl who refused to give up.